Hi, hello friends, welcome back to Night Court Narrative. My name is Elvish. I hope you guys are doing fantastic. Today we have A Stark View by Alexis Patone. Patone? I hope I'm saying that right. I came across this author on TikTok, and to be completely honest with you, I was under the impression that this was a standalone that had just come out. I was completely unaware that book 2 is already out and we're actually waiting for book 3. So I definitely have my work cut out for me as far as getting caught up goes. But yes, today we are discussing A Stark View. You know, this one really actually surprised me, and obviously in a good way. I really enjoyed this book actually. From the very beginning, the world building in this book immediately pulled me in. The setting gives off very strong dystopian vibes. Kind of reminded me a lot of maybe Fallout, if you will, like the video game. It's gritty, oppressive, and the society has been created to feel both structured and deeply corrupt at the exact same time, which I absolutely loved. The author did an incredible job making the world of Apollo feel real, from the brutal prison system to the stark contrast between the prisoners and the wealthy parts of society. It was so good. One of the things that really stood out to me was the character development though. Watching Khalani navigate the system and slowly grow stronger throughout the story felt very natural. You see her forced into situations where she has to adapt, survive, and even learn quickly, and the progression feels very believable rather than rushed, which you guys know I have a difficult time with in books a lot of the time, because they definitely, the pacing and development is very off most times and it kind of ruins the story. But I do think that this one was done so incredibly well. The relationship in the story too developed very well over time. It wasn't super romantic-y, but especially within the prison environment, they did what they could with it, and I do think it was done incredibly well. The connections added emotional weight to the story and made the stakes feel very much higher, which again, as I just said, in the prison environment, you know, you can only do what you can. Our female main character Khalani, she is a prisoner, and our male main character, he is the captain of the prison guards, so there's not much that can really happen between them, but when it happens, you know. I wanted to take a quick second and talk about the thing I don't like, because there's only one thing I didn't necessarily like. Well, I guess two things I kind of didn't like in this book, so I do want to take a moment to talk about those. But I did overall enjoy this book. I gave this book a 4-star rating. This book was absolutely phenomenal. There were a couple of elements that didn't really work for me. One of the biggest ones was obviously the guards. At times I felt the guards were incredibly boxy. Their dialogue often came off as pretty one-dimensional, and it sometimes felt like their lines lacked depth or personality that could have easily made them overly memorable. I do feel like the guards lacked every ounce of substance to them. It felt very much why I oughta rather than like actual antagonists that give you the sense of dread. So that was definitely one of the things. The only other thing I have noticed this more frequently recently in the fantasy and dystopian genres, but it's the sexual assault, the grape, if you will. It's used a little bit too heavily as a plot device. Personally, I don't usually find topics triggering and whatnot, nor am I saying that this book was overly triggering, no, but I do think it's become incredibly normalized in these genres. It almost feels as if every dystopian or fantasy story includes this topic at some point, and sometimes it comes across less as meaningful and something that we can learn from, but more of a shortcut to generate sympathy or shock value from the readers. I do think there are a lot of other ways to create emotional impact without relying on triggers so heavy, if that makes sense. With that being said, one dynamic I genuinely did enjoy was the tension between Khalani and Takeshi. Their relationship added a really interesting layer to the story, and Takeshi himself as a character, I found him so compelling. He was a stud. There are a lot of like complexity in the way that he's written, and that kind of, I don't know if I want to say morally gray, but he does kind of give off a morally gray energy that makes their interactions much more interesting and longing, like a lot of longing. The political side of this story was also incredibly fascinating. The government structure of Apollo was exactly what you would expect from a dystopian world. Obviously it comes with the corruption, the controlling, having the government try and maintain power at any cost, even if that does rely on population control and demand. But the moments where we do see contrast between the prisoners and the wealthier sides, particularly in Genesis, those were quite interesting. Those glimpses make the world feel much larger than just the prison, and it really highlighted how uneven and broken the system was. I do feel like part of the story too, going off of the lines of that, part of the story, not just Fallout vibes, but it gave me very much Prison Break vibes. If you guys have seen that show, that is a fantastic show, absolutely love it. But it definitely gave you insight of not only the government and the dystopian realm that they're in, but it also gives you more of like the hierarchy within the prison and how that necessarily dictates the wealth, honestly, with, I don't want to give too much away, but with the prisoners having to take on certain jobs, and unfortunately they get into some shit. So it does give you insight on when the prisoners are around the wealthy, on obviously how they are treated and whatnot within the society. So I did find that beyond interesting. And then of course the ending, which I was kind of mind blown by it. I don't really get mind blown by endings very often. The revelation towards the end raised so many questions about the world and obviously the truth behind the characters. I immediately had so many questions. It's one of those endings that doesn't just close the story, but it shifts your understanding of the world, if that makes sense. The cliffhanger did its job. By the time I finished the book, I was immediately needing the second book. There are so many unanswered questions, and I'm so curious to see where this book goes. I did find this so engaging. I found it so it was just, it got me hooked, you know. It was one of those stories where I finished this book within 6 hours, from start to finish, and I could not put it down once I started. It was so unique and it was so good. I do think the only thing that really did knock it down an entire point from being 5 stars were the guards. Now, I'm not talking about our main character Takeshi. He was very different, and he had the brooding attitude and the angst with him, and it was very well. He was written very well. But the other guards, I don't know, they were just boxy. They were like just words on a paper at that point, and I don't think that the author intended anything of that nature, obviously, but I don't know, there were some guards throughout the book that were written so incredibly well, and others I feel like were placeholders, if you will, or they were filler. They weren't actually in the original story, possibly added at a later date to add substance, but it did quite the opposite. So in my personal opinion, that did mark off half a point. Does this book deserve higher? Possibly. I would even go as far as saying this book deserves a 4.5, but I think the 4 is very, very, very realistic in the writing style that we did get. And honestly, this book was really good. I cannot wait. I had no idea that I was getting into another series, especially with book 3 being released later this year, but man, I cannot wait to read book 2, and I think I'm going to read book 2 within the next coming days, so you're definitely going to see book 2 on here fairly soon. But have you guys read this book? I know I always give stuff away, but it's always the books I really, really love that I don't want to give away, and I don't feel like I can give too much away from this, because obviously if you guys have read dystopian books, you guys know that the main part, and I mean like 90% of the book, is the main like twist and everything of that nature. So I don't feel like I can say too much more without completely ruining the plot and giving absolutely everything away, especially that ending. Hello. So definitely go give this a chance. Go pick it up. Let me know what you guys think. These are on Kindle Unlimited. If you guys have a Kindle, it is completely free to read. Yes, definitely do that. I highly recommend. And it's very rare, I don't want to say rare, but it's very rare that a book under 4.5 stars gets highly recommended. Like, I recommend books, but I don't highly recommend books unless they, you know, exceed every expectation and my rating goes through the roof. But this one definitely deserves the highly recommendation, and I do hope that you guys read it. But yes, have you guys read the book? If so, let me know what your favorite parts were. Let me know what your worst parts were. If you loved the book, if you hated the book, even if you want to add this to your TBR, definitely let me know down below. And I cannot wait to read book 2. But yes, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, y'all.